This morning, continuing in the series that began last week in the book of Proverbs, a series entitled Wisdom in a Post-Truth World. Last Sunday's message was really an introduction to the idea of wisdom, and today we are going to be dealing with the matter of, and the sermon title is Wisdom and Fear. Now, usually when any of us hear the word fear, it has a negative connotation, doesn't it? We think of spiders, or we think of heights, or we think of lifts, or we think of nightmares, whatever your particular fear or phobia may be. I mean, the idea of fear naturally doesn't sound like a good thing. Am I right? That we shy away from it. In fact, if we are sane, would try and avoid such fears at all costs. And so it's strange in many ways to our senses to hear the Bible talk about fear as something necessary, even beneficial, which is exactly what is made abundantly clear in our text for today in Proverbs. Nothing other than that well-known axiom that we get from the book of Proverbs. Proverbs chapter 1, verse 7. And that is the single verse that we're going to be unpacking this morning. It reads this: "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction." I mean, there's no question. What the Bible is telling us here is that there is actually a kind of fear that is positive, that is good, believe it or not. It's to fear God or to fear the Lord. I mean, so much so that it is, as you may well know, a repeated principle that kind of holds the book of Proverbs together. I mean, this idea of the fear of the Lord is mentioned approximately 15 times in the book of Proverbs. Let me read for you maybe a couple other, and you can turn with me there in your Bibles, of examples. Proverbs chapter 3, verse 7, which says, "Be not wise in your own eyes, fear the Lord, and turn from evil." Proverbs chapter 9 and verse 10, a couple of pages on. "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is insight." Proverbs chapter 14, verse 27. "The fear of the Lord is a fountain of life, that one may turn away from the snares of death." And then lastly for now, Proverbs chapter 19 and verse 23. "The fear of the Lord leads to life, and whoever has it rests satisfied. He will not be visited by harm." And so it's clear that the psalmist is adamant. The writer of Proverbs is adamant that this idea of the fear of the Lord is real, but more than that, it is something good, something positive, something to be sought after. I mean, those latter Proverbs we've just read speak of the fear of the Lord as a fountain of life, as a place that provides rest and protection. It's a good thing, something we all need. And of course, this idea of the fear of the Lord is central to all the wisdom books in the Old Testament in the Bible. It's not unique to Proverbs. We read about it in, for example, the book of Job, where the writer says, "Behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to turn away from evil is understanding." And further too, in the book of Ecclesiastes, that closing kind of summary statement that perhaps you are familiar with at the end of the book in Ecclesiastes 12:13, where the writer sums it up by saying, "The end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. Again and again, a rich reality in the Bible, in the Old Testament at least, is to fear the Lord. But that does sound like something archaic, doesn't it? It sounds like something that is kind of Old Testament kind of vibe. I mean, is that something, the fear of the Lord, that really applies to us today as Christians? Is it something still relevant for us? Well, certainly the New Testament speaks about it equally with the Old Testament. For example, the book of 1 Peter, we read in the first and second chapter two references to this same reality. Peter writes, and if you call on him as Father, clearly speaking to Christians, if you call him as Father, who judges impartially according to each one's work, each one's deeds, conduct yourselves with fear throughout the time of your life. And then secondly, in the second chapter of Peter, he simply states, honor everyone, love the brotherhood, fear God, honor the emperor. So it is a reality that very much applies to us today as Christians. So then that's the question, well, what does it mean to fear the Lord? And especially, what does it mean for us as Christians today? And how is that something that is then the source and the beginning and the fountain of wisdom? Well, let's begin by tackling this all-important reality that clearly should feature in each of our lives. The fear of the Lord. I mean, how many of us woke up this morning saying, today I'm going to fear the Lord? None of us did. Well, we can glean a richer and deeper understanding from the other references in the book of Proverbs itself to the fear of the Lord. And so if you got your Bible still open there, back in Proverbs chapter 2 and verse 5, this is what we read. Then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God. So there's our first clue. There's a clear link, you notice, there between the fear of the Lord and what? A knowledge of God. And that's confirmed by the proverb we read just now in chapter 9, verse 10, which says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the Holy One is insight. And so that verse 2 is just drawing a clear parallel using this same idea of the fear of the Lord and linking it to knowledge of the Holy One or knowledge of God. So in other words, where does the fear of God begin? It begins with a knowledge of God, with knowing who He is, knowing what He is like, getting a grasp of His character. And there's so much that is necessary and that we could say about who God is. But here's at least what we need to know about Him. In this context of the knowledge of God that is fundamental to the fear of God. Firstly, we need to know that He is who? The creator of the world. That He made you, that He made me, that He made everything. That God is the one who indeed owns everything. That He is the source of everything. That He is therefore above everything. That He is infinite. That, as I've said so many times before, that it's like this, that there is God. And then there's everything else. That He has existed outside of time forever. He is the Creator God. And in that sense, holy, separate, unmatched, unparalleled, beyond compare. It's as Paul relates to a pagan society 2,000 years ago in Athens, telling them about God in the same way that the world today, post Christian is increasingly needing to hear about God again. He says, the God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth. It does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands, as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. And so Paul in Athens, surrounded by altar after altar to every other god, explains to them this one altar to the unknown God, and uses that as the contact point to describe the true God of the universe, being the one who made the world and everything in it, and who stands outside of it. Secondly, therefore, because he is the creator, we need to know the knowledge of God must begin with realizing then that he is the ruler, that he controls everything, that he determines everything, that he is utterly, absolutely sovereign of the heavens and the earth and the seas, of the past, of the present, of the future, of all things physical and all things spiritual. He is sovereign over everything. As Paul goes on in Acts 17 to say to these pagan people, and so he made from one man, Adam, every nation of mankind to live on the face of the earth, having determined the allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling places. You are here on the 28th of February 2021 in George, in this particular place. Why? Ultimately not because you had a car to drive here. Ultimately not because your alarm clock went off and you only snoozed it twice so you could just make it here in time. But ultimately because God determined you would be here. And so thirdly, to realize not only is he creator and ruler, but the fact that we can know him, the fact that he has revealed himself, the fact that he has created when he didn't have to, because in his Trinity he was self-existent and self-sufficient. And as we've said, needed nothing, yet he made us because he wants to know us. And so therefore God is, without question, personal. He is near. We have been made to know him. We've been made even for relationship with him. God is not simply distant. God is not simply amorphous. He is personal and can be known, as Paul continues in Acts 17, that we should seek God in the hope that we might find our way toward him. For he is actually not far from us. For in him we live and we move and we have our being. I mean, the knowledge of God begins there with knowing that he is the creator and that he is the ruler and that he is personal. And so in many ways what we're saying is that the knowledge of God that is necessary to the fear of God is summed up in what the writer to Hebrews in that chapter about faith says in verse 6, where he writes, and without faith, it is impossible to please him. For whoever would draw near to God must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who seek him. That is where the knowledge of God fundamentally begins, is recognizing that he exists, therefore creator and ruler, and that he desires that we should seek him, that he is near. I mean, so how's that? That should blow something of your original understanding of the fear of God out of the water. Because what this is saying so clearly is that, can you believe it, that yes, the fear of God begins with what? The fear of God begins with faith. That fear and faith are not opposed to each other. They're not apart. They in fact coexist. In fact, it's because of faith, and only ever because of faith in the beginning can we fear God as Christians. Because faith causes us to believe what we cannot see. It causes us to trust a God despite our circumstances, despite the world, who is sovereign and who is good. How else do you come to that place but by faith? And so faith is essential to fearing God, to recognizing He exists and that He rewards those who seek Him. In many ways, faith, we could even say, is the fuel to our fear of Him. The knowledge of God, that is the beginning of the fear of God, is only as a result of faith in God. And as we understand then something of who God is, we find ourselves automatically then and simultaneously understanding, and necessarily so, who we are. You see, who God is, the knowledge of God, determines who we are, determines the knowledge about ourselves. And you see, we can only fear God, not only if we see who He is, but if we understand who we are in relation to who He is. And so therefore, it goes without saying that if we acknowledge that that's who God is, we realize then where we stand is in this position, that we are dependent on Him. We are accountable to Him. And so we live with a respect for His authority and for His sovereignty. We acknowledge that this is His world, and that I'm called to live kind of, therefore, God's way in God's world. He says, as we know God, so we then know our place, and so we then fear the Lord. We hold God up in His rightful place of supremacy in our lives. Suddenly He becomes king, and He moves to center instead of ourselves. And so our lives in fearing God, in knowing Him, and automatically knowing ourselves, becomes orientated around God. So that, as the Proverbs go on to say, be not wise in your own eyes, fear the Lord, and turn from evil. Or Proverbs chapter 8, verse 13, the fear of the Lord is the hatred of evil. The one who fears the Lord turns away from evil. In other words, the default effect upon our lives of fearing God is that we now then follow God. We now then live for God. We turn from evil and we follow His ways. In other words, it's a knowledge of God that isn't just theoretical. It's a fear of God that is very practical. It changes your very life from day to day. We're not talking about some abstract philosophical thing to be debated in universities. The fear of God changes the very existence of our lives. Here's perhaps a very plain example of what we've said thus far about how fearing God and having a true knowledge of God therefore changes our understanding of ourselves and our entire lives. Take two physicians, both with approximately the same training and skill. The one fears God and earnestly seeks to use his medical expertise to serve God by helping others. The other has no fear of God and uses his skill to perform abortions. Both doctors have exactly the same ability, but it is used to very different ends. The one is used to save lives, the other to end lives. The one is used to honor God, the other dishonors God. The one is wise, the other is actually a fool. That's the difference that the fear of God makes to life. To fear God is to know God and to follow God. Let's put that a bit more subjectively, though. To fear God is to feel the weight of the majesty of God upon your heart. To fear God is to feel the weight of the majesty of God upon your heart. You see, God is not a genie that we can rub to get what we want. God is not a cosmic vending machine that we can pop our coin, our prayer into, and expect Him to deliver as we need. God is not a heavenly butler who is there to serve us every time we have a need and only call on Him then, and for the rest of our lives we live without Him. God is not a God who can be manipulated by us and brought down to our level. God is not a God who we can sing about on Sunday and ignore during the rest of the week. God is not a God who we can talk about amongst our Christian friends and at church, but at school and at work and at home live completely otherwise. God is not a God who puts up with any of that. Because if we fear God, we will feel the weight of His majesty upon our hearts, and we will take nothing about Him for granted. But here's the sad reality. Even as Paul writes in Romans chapter 3, but yet there are none who fear God. But most people in the world today have no idea or desire to fear God. For most, they don't feel like that about God. God is irrelevant. God is non-existent. God is there for me to question and for me to judge and for me to put in the hot seat. God is there for me to judge. And so what is the truth about those people is while they don't fear God, they are the very ones who will, if nothing changes, face the reality that the fear of God is also a negative thing. That the fear of God is also a bad thing. That the fear of God, like all our other fears that we run away from, is and will be, for those who reject Him, a dangerous thing. It is a threatening thing to have that fear of God hanging over you. Jesus Himself in the New Testament speaks so clearly about it. And do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather, fear Him who can what? Destroy both soul and body in hell. To those who have no sense of this fear of God, I wonder if it could not be that every one of our natural fears that we have, whether it's spiders or whether it's small spaces, are not perhaps a pointer, or not perhaps something even of a sign of this greatest of fears that we need to realize. That as we tremble before a spider, it's actually God perhaps trying to wake us up and get our attention to the fact that there's a reality of a much greater and a much more real fear that you need to tremble before. That there's something that should cause much more panic and hopelessness and insecurity in your life. That every time we fear small spaces or snakes or heights, could it be that God is giving us a taste of this infinitely greater and eternal fear that we will all experience one day if we have not come to now rightly fear God for who He is? Because we will stand before Him one day as the judge of the universe. And so could it be that those very fears that we have right now is like an alarm or a warning from God to the reality of the fear of judgment that hangs over every single one of us? That right now God is seeking to get our attention in even those smallest and seemingly insignificant of ways before we have to stand naked in God's blazing presence one day. And so could it be that those bad fears are actually a good fear? That God, as He does in so many ways in life, in His common grace and in His mercy, tries to get our attention, to make us realize that there is more to this life, to make us realize that He is real, to make us realize as pointers, as signposts to this deeper reality of God and of our need of Him, and to surrender to Him and to be made right with Him. That we need to come, every man and every woman and every child, in humility before God. That God truly is seeking to lead us in mercy to Himself. It's incredible. We don't fear God today. We'll fear terrorism. We'll fear COVID. We'll fear our privacy online being invaded by social media platforms. But we don't blink an eye when it comes to God. And so perhaps we need to ask the question today, have you been hardening, like Pharaoh of old, your heart towards God? While God has been trying to get your attention, you have been resisting and denying. Well, He is real, and His judgment is real. And if He is convicting in any way your heart now, if the weight of His majesty is beginning to rest upon you, realizing you cannot escape His awesome presence, that perhaps you cry out to Him, that His Holy Spirit would work humility and soften your heart, and that you would fall before Him in repentance and in faith. You see, we must fear God. We must have respect and reverence and awe for Him. It is like the story that one author relates about a general in the Marine Corps in the United States and his recruit. This is what we read. The story began years ago when Butch McGregor was only 18. And he stood trembling at the drill instructors, as the drill instructor screamed in his face, calling him a stupid imbecile and a few other choice abusive words. Butch hadn't done anything seriously wrong. He had just somehow managed to get out of step with the rest of the platoon as they marched across the drill field. But the slightest infraction, the most insignificant mistake, could cost Butch 50 push-ups or 10 laps around the drill field in full combat gear. Only a few days earlier, he had stood at attention, holding his rifle straight in front of his chest until his arms could stand it no longer, when the drill instructor chewed him out for being such a weakling. This wasn't exactly what Butch had in mind when he talked to the recruiting sergeant just after graduating from high school. He heard the Marines were looking for a few good men, and at 6 feet, 2 inches, and 200 pounds of solid muscle, Butch thought that he qualified. But what Butch hadn't expected was how much mental and emotional abuse he would experience in basic training. But such is life at the Marine Corps boot camp, where merciless drill instructors try to mold undisciplined young Americans into men and women who obey orders without hesitancy or questioning, a trait absolutely vital in combat. In this atmosphere, the drill instructor takes on an aura of being just less than God. His every word is law. The slightest mistake or infraction is caught and punished. Very quickly, the new recruit learns to stand in awe of this man who yields such authority and power over him. Well, such is God over us. Like it or not, accept it or not, He stands with such authority and power over us. But even people can know that. Even people can hear about hell and the judgment of God and not be moved. You can paint the scariest picture of what the judgment of God might be like. And they may, for a moment, feel slightly sober. But the next day, carry on. Because the truth is, none of us can ever and will ever fear the Lord. That there's only one person who has ever truly feared the Lord the way that we need to. There's only one person. And that's who Isaiah writes about in chapter 11 in the Old Testament, where we read, "And the Spirit of the Lord will rest on him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and of power, the Spirit of knowledge and of the fear of the Lord. And he will delight in the fear of the Lord." Who is this man? Who can be such that will so perfectly fear God? Well, we know that there is one who has come, who is none other than Jesus Christ. It is the Son of God who came and who lived in fulfillment of this prophecy of the servant of the Lord who would walk in humility and obey the Father perfectly. That He is the only one who could truly fear the Lord, because all of us fail to do so. We're without hope if we're going to try and pull up our own bootstraps and get ourselves sucked up enough and fearful enough and go searching after snakes every day to remind ourselves that we need to fear God. But it's never going to work. We need someone to fear God for us. In other words, we need someone to save us from ourselves, from our lack of the fear of God. And thereby to save us from that awful fear of God that is upon us in His judgment and in His eternal wrath and condemnation. And that one is Jesus, who has lived the life we could not live of fearing God, and who further has come to pay the price for our failure of the fear of God upon the cross. Dying the perfect death, taking our punishment to save us. You see, the only way that I'm going to fear God is if God enables me to fear Him. And it's Jesus Christ who has come to do it. And so the incredible thing that the one who has every right to dismiss us and pour out the wrath of God, the greatest fear that is all upon us, on us, doesn't. He has every right to command us to fear Him, but He doesn't. Instead, He comes in our place and fulfills the fear of God positively and negatively for us. It is like the story about Butch continues. And so following basic training, Butch was assigned to a divisional motor pool where he soon became recognized as a skillful and responsible driver, and so was rewarded with promotion to corporal. Meanwhile, General Collins had been promoted to Major General and became the commanding officer of Butch's division. And because of his reputation, Butch was eventually selected to be the general's driver. Butch naturally had mixed emotions about this new assignment. I mean, he relished the confidence shown in him, But on the other hand, he remembered those cold, steely eyes of that memorable inspection day in the boot camp, and awe once again gripped him as he reported for duty on that first day. Sergeant McGregor, as Butch was now called, soon discovered that behind those steely blue eyes was a no-nonsense general who was rough and tough, but fair. As he listened to the general's conversations with the other officers riding in the car, Butch was often amazed at the general's evident wisdom and military skill. He also noticed the increased morale that the general's leadership gave to the entire division. And so his awe for the general gradually increased, though its dominant aspect was no longer fear, but respect and admiration. He could easily envision General Collins one day being the being commandant of the entire Marine Corps. And of course, Butch had always shown respect towards the general. That was absolutely essential to his job. But now he began to feel respect. He genuinely admired the general for both his personal character and his military leadership. One day he realized he had even begun to like the general, and he was fairly certain that the general liked him. Despite this growing personal relationship, though, Butch never lost the sense of awe toward the general. He was always conscious of the vast difference in rank between them. Even in casual conversation, he always addressed the general as Sir. In the course of time, war broke out, and Butch's division was shipped overseas. As the general's driver, Butch was never involved in actual combat, though they often traveled in dangerous territory. Then one day, the car struck a landmine, and General Collins was thrown clear of the car, but was seriously hurt when his body slammed to the ground. Butch, meanwhile, remained trapped in the front seat of the burning vehicle. But despite the general's own injuries and at risk to his life, he managed to pull Butch out of the car to safety. Both men were quickly evacuated to the field hospital. General Collins soon recovered sufficiently to resume his duties, but Butch remained in hospital for weeks. And despite the pressures of commanding a division in battle, the general often stopped by to see Butch and check on his progress. Butch was surprised at the general's obvious concern, but what was really astounding to him was the realization that at the scene of the accident, the general had literally risked his life to save him. He slowly came to the conclusion that despite of their vast difference in rank, the general genuinely loved him. And you see, friends, Jesus has come not just to risk his life for us, but to totally give his life for us, to save us. And so this fear of God that we talk about is therefore one that happens, yes, only because God, through Christ, has made it possible for us to fear him and to save us. And because of that, bring us into relationship with himself through his love and through his mercy. And so the fear of God is not that of a slave towards his master. The fear of God in the Bible is instead ultimately that of a son toward his father. It is a fear that doesn't turn us from God, but in an incredible way, it is a fear that instead drives us towards God. You see, the fear of God, to add to our brief description earlier, is this: to fear God is to feel the weight of the majesty and the mercy of God upon your heart. That ultimately it is because of his love for you that you now know through Jesus Christ that your heart has been changed to love him. And so that all that you desire now is but to live for him, is but to honor him, is but to please him. That your desire is but to fall down and worship him in everything. because you feel the weight of the majesty and the mercy of God upon your heart. So the question this morning is, do we know God for who He is? Do we have such a fear of God that it is indeed constraining our lives? That, as Jerry Bridges writes, the fear of God becomes the animating and invigorating principle of our lives. And because of that, because of this fear of God, it means that everything we do, every moment, becomes important. That every second of time that we have is God's time. That every relationship we have is God's opportunity. Every responsibility we have is God's calling. Every possession we have is God's possession. That everything in life now takes on this grand new weight, this grand new purpose. That life, in fact, when you fear God, becomes so much fuller, so much richer, so much bigger, so much better. And therefore, our lives begin to become increasingly characterized by this reality of wisdom. Because God is in His rightful place. We are in our rightful places. And therefore we live completely and increasingly in sync with God's purpose for our lives and God's design for His universe. Everybody's life begins with the fear of God. The question is just, what kind of fear will our lives end with? Let us pray. We thank you, O God, that you have come and made yourself known for us. But Lord, unfathomably, that you have come even to do everything so that we could know you. That Jesus Christ is now our source and our life. And so now, Lord, we walk every day in confident, humble relationship and wonder with you. What a glory, what a privilege. May you make this weight of the majesty and mercy of God push so much deeper upon our hearts.